She walked into the delivery room without looking anyone in the eye. The nurse had called her 3 times already. "Doctor, we have a case. Emergency C-section. Blood pressure dropping fast." Still, she walked like it was routine. Like the woman screaming on the table wasn't dying. Like the fetal monitor wasn't already sounding a quiet alarm. She looked at the patient, black, sweating, eyes wild with pain, and wrinkled her nose. Then turned to the nurse and said flatly, "You can wait for someone else. I'm not doing this mess. She's not my patient." But the nurse hesitated. "She's crashing." I said, "She's not mine." The doctor pulled her gloves off, dropped them in the bin, turned, and left. Behind her, the room spun. The patient screamed. The nurse froze. Outside the door, a man stood silent. Suit, still, hands clasped. He had heard it all. Didn't step in. Didn't argue. He just turned his gaze to the placard on the doctor's coat, memorized the name, and whispered one sentence to himself. "Not today, but soon. Leave a comment. Where are you watching from?" Some stories don't shout, but they stay. She woke up at exactly 4:50 in the morning, not because of an alarm, just because her body had learned to prepare itself before anyone else asked anything of it. She shifted slowly, one hand over the slope of her belly. 38 weeks. It was getting harder to breathe, harder to roll, harder to tie her shoes. But she moved anyway. No complaints. Just breath. In, out. The window cracked slightly, letting in air that was cooler than it should have been for late summer. She liked that. It felt honest, like the day had not yet decided what kind of trouble it wanted to cause. Her name was Camilla, 32 years old. She lived in a second-floor apartment with no elevator and no complaints. A small place. Nothing fancy, but it was clean. Quiet. Hers. She shared it with her husband. People in the building barely knew him. They knew he wore suits, that he left early, came back late, that he nodded politely to the doorman and remembered names that others forgot. Camilla did not speak much about what he did, and he did not need to speak about what she carried. They moved through the world like people who had both seen worse and chosen stillness anyway. Camilla worked part-time, remote, processing applications for housing assistance, reading long, desperate forms, noting every missed signature, every box left unchecked. Not because she wanted to deny anyone, but because if she did not mark it, someone else would throw the whole application away. She knew how systems worked. She had lived inside them. Now she tried, in small invisible ways, to keep the worst from happening to other people. It was not glamorous. It did not pay much, but it made sense to her. It felt like something solid in a world that kept shifting. She drank her tea slow that morning. Rooibos. No caffeine. She sat near the window, listened to the creak of someone upstairs moving around too early, the neighbor's dog scratching at the back door, a garbage truck 3 streets over. All of it ordinary, all of it alive. She liked mornings because they had not disappointed her yet. Her doctor's appointment had been moved twice, once because of a scheduling error, once because the provider was running behind. She did not complain. She rescheduled. She rescheduled again, because that was what you did when you were not the kind of patient who was prioritized, because she had learned how to wait without being noticed. The last time she went in, the nurse had misread her file, assumed she was on Medicaid, asked if she had transportation problems. Camilla smiled, said gently, "I drove here." The nurse blinked, then said nothing, but the assumption was there, like dust, always present, always settling. She wiped it off without rage, but she never forgot it was there. At the pharmacy last week, she'd been asked for ID twice. Once when picking up a vitamin, once again for Tylenol with codeine, which had been prescribed for her lower back pain. They looked at her with that same tight-lipped smile that said, "We do not think you are stealing, but we will make sure you know we are watching." She showed her ID, waited, took her bag, walked away. No words, no fight, just the quiet dignity of someone who refused to be baited. Camilla was the kind of person people underestimated. Too quiet, too calm, too polite to be considered powerful. And yet, She moved like someone who had already learned what power did when it was wielded wrong. She had seen it flatten people, shred them. So she held her own power like a secret, like a second skin, like something not everyone deserved to see. She had not told most people who her husband was, not out of shame, but because his title would make them treat her like someone else, and she needed to know who treated her as herself. He never offered it. She never used it. They lived simple, but not blind. She packed her hospital bag, slowly that morning, just in case, folded a nightgown, a toothbrush, a soft baby blanket, a small folder with documents, her insurance, her ID, his business card, tucked in the very back, just in case. She did not expect trouble, but black mothers were allowed fewer mistakes. She knew the numbers. She had read the studies. She knew that in this country, even educated black women were 3 times more likely to die giving birth than their white counterparts. She had seen the documentaries. She had heard the stories. She had held them in her own body and decided, not me, not this time. She breathed slowly through a cramp. It was not a contraction, not yet, but it was getting closer. She sipped her tea, watched the sky turn gray-blue, and reminded herself again. She had done everything right. All her appointments, all her check-ins, all her vitamins, all her questions asked politely, quietly, so she would not be dismissed as dramatic. Still, she knew, sometimes that was not enough. Her husband came out of the shower around 6:30 in the morning. He kissed her forehead, looked at her eyes, asked, "How are we feeling?" She shrugged, still waiting. He nodded, made her breakfast, scrambled eggs, a slice of toast, fruit. They ate in silence, not awkward, just practiced, like a ritual meant to steady the room. He would leave soon, just for a few hours, an emergency motion, a bench session with 2 attorneys. He said, "I'll keep my phone up." She said, "I know." He paused. "Do you want me to stay?" She said no, because she did not want to be the reason the courtroom missed something important. She could still walk. She could still breathe. And when the moment came, she would call. At 8:40, he left. Tight navy suit, crisp collar, briefcase, quiet hands. He was not famous, but he was powerful. One of the youngest judges ever appointed to the state's highest court. He had written decisions that changed lives. He had argued before panels that changed laws. But most days, he just wanted to work like anyone else. And no one saw how heavy the silence around him really was. Camilla sat by the window, rubbed her belly, spoke low to the child inside her. Just a few more days. Just a little longer. Then we meet. She didn't know that in 24 hours, everything would shift. That someone would look at her pain and decide it was not urgent. That someone would hear her name and decide it was not worth saying properly. That someone would walk into a room and look at her black skin and pregnant body and decide, not mine. She didn't know it yet, but soon, the world would show her exactly what it thought she was worth. And then, quietly, without shouting, without threats, the world would learn who she was connected to, and what happens when dignity is denied in front of the wrong man's wife. Her water broke at 11:30 in the morning. She had been sitting on the edge of the bed, folding a small onesie, when it happened. Warmth, sudden, inevitable. She did not panic. She stood slowly, grabbed a towel, breathed. She had done the classes. She had read the books. She knew what early labor looked like. This was early. But the pressure in her lower back was not early. It was deep, and sharp, and rising. She called the hospital, spoke calmly. "My water just broke. 38 weeks. Movement strong, but pain has picked up quickly." The nurse on the line asked if it was her first child. She said yes. The nurse said, "You probably have time, but come in when you can." She called her husband. He said, "On my way." The hospital was 17 minutes away. He drove them in 13. She did not scream. She did not cry. She sat upright, face still, hands folded over her belly. Every few minutes, her breath caught in her chest, but she said nothing. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near hers. They entered through the emergency entrance. He walked her to the front desk. "I called ahead," she said. The woman nodded, clicked a few keys. "Have a seat. Someone will come get you." She lowered herself into the chair slowly. The contraction hit harder. 30 seconds, then 60. Her breath shortened. No one came. He stood, went back to the desk. "My wife is in active labor. She needs to be seen." The woman looked at him, then looked past him, then back at the screen. "It says someone's on the way." 9 more minutes passed. The nurse arrived. Young, nervous. She said, "Room A is open." Camilla stood slowly, took 2 steps, then stopped. She could not walk. The nurse reached to help, then hesitated. Her husband caught the moment, watched her hands falter, watched her eyes shift, as if uncertain whether to touch. He said nothing, but the air around him thickened. They got her into the wheelchair, pushed her down the hall. The contractions were coming faster, no time between them. Inside the room, a second nurse joined, checked her quickly, then called out too loud, "She's fully dilated." "Doctor on the floor?" "Paging her now. Baby's coming. We need a decision. Now." Camilla gripped the rails, closed her eyes, breathed through it. Everything in her body said the same thing. Something is wrong. The heart monitor beeped faster, then slower. The nurse adjusted the belt. "Baby's heart rate is decelerating." "Call again." Still no answer. 3 more minutes. Then she arrived. The doctor. White coat, tired eyes, late 40s, hair pulled tight. She walked in like someone already behind schedule. Did not introduce herself. Did not look at Camilla. Only looked at the chart. "Who is this?" The nurse said her name. Added, 38 weeks. Ruptured membranes. Fetal heart rate unstable. She's ready for surgery. The doctor glanced at Camilla, raised one eyebrow, then looked back at the nurse. "Is she even pre-registered?" "Yes." "Where's her OB?" "On vacation. This is a handoff." The doctor stepped closer. Still did not touch her. Still did not look in her eyes. Then she said it. Flat. Cold. Dismissive. "She can wait. I'm not cutting into someone I don't know. I have my own patients." The nurse froze. "But she's crashing." I said, "She's not mine." Then quieter, but still loud enough to sting. "And I'm not starting my afternoon elbow deep in someone who shows up without warning." The words landed like stone. In the air. In the body. In the mind. Camilla heard them. Every syllable. She did not respond. Could not. Her body was shaking. Her breath uneven. Her skin slick with sweat. But she saw. She saw the way the doctor held her own hands like they were too clean to risk. She saw the way she stepped back, like the room was contaminated. Like she was. Outside the room, her husband stood. He heard everything. Through the half-open door. Through the silence that followed. He stepped forward, but stopped. Not because he was afraid, but because he wanted to remember. Exactly what was said. The doctor left. Said she had to check on another room. Said someone else would come. Did not come back. The nurse called again. Urgent. Another voice replied on the intercom. A different doctor. 2 floors up. "I'm on my way." It took 9 minutes. 9 minutes of falling heart tones. 9 minutes of Camilla whispering please through clenched teeth. 9 minutes of the nurse holding her hand and saying, "You're not alone. You're not alone." Even though she was. The second doctor arrived running. Saw the chart. Yelled for prep. They rushed her into the OR. The lights were too bright. The room too cold. The pain sharpened. Then blurred. Then faded. When she woke, her husband was at her side. Her chest was sore. Her throat dry. Her belly empty. She looked up. He nodded. The baby was okay. She was okay. But only just. Later, the nurse would tell her. The first doctor never returned. Left her shift early. Did not document the refusal. Did not check back in. Did not say her name again. Camilla said nothing. Just stared at the ceiling. And held her child. 3 days later, a form appeared. Standard discharge paperwork. With a survey attached. Please rate your experience. Please describe any concerns. She left it blank, because she knew better. She knew what happened when people complained. The words got buried. The files went missing. The story became a misunderstanding. But that was not what this was. This was a decision, a choice, to see her pain and walk away. But she did not walk away. She lived. And because she lived, so did the memory of a doctor who looked at a black woman in labor and chose not to help. The mistake was not what she did. The mistake was who she did it in front of. It began with a login, not a complaint, not a press conference, just a quiet login into a secure legal database used by the judiciary. At 7:43 in the morning, the husband entered his credentials, reviewed a list of hospital oversight case histories, then opened a blank internal memorandum form. Subject line: practitioner misconduct under emergency standard. No names. Not yet. Just a case description. A mother in active labor. A doctor on duty. A refusal to act. A delay in care that nearly cost 2 lives. And a timestamp. 11:47 in the morning to 12:26 in the afternoon. The window in which the harm occurred. That was all. He saved the file. Did not submit it. Not yet. Because what came next did not begin with paperwork. It began with a reputation. And hers was about to unravel. Her name was Dr. Ellen Kepler. Board certified. Graduated from a private medical school in the Northeast. 15 years in practice. No major incidents. 1 minor citation 3 years ago for a delayed patient handoff. Nothing serious. She had a clean record. But clean did not mean invisible. Not anymore. At 9:15 in the morning, an email went out. Not from the judge. From an administrator inside the hospital legal team. Flagging an anomaly in the surgical delay log. A gap between emergency diagnosis and provider response. Over 30 minutes unaccounted for. Another flag noted that the primary attending physician never completed the patient's chart. No exit summary. No incident note. No formal statement. And then came the second flag. The patient's spouse was listed as an emergency contact. His name, not listed as a judge, but as a licensed attorney, with state and federal clearances. That name triggered a secondary review. Because inside certain systems, names do not stay still. They ripple. By 10:30 in the morning, the hospital compliance officer requested a review. Informal. Internal. No press. No alerts. But the tone had changed. Because this was not a patient asking questions. This was a man with power asking none. And power, without words, was always the most dangerous kind. Dr. Kepler was paged. She ignored it. She was off shift. At a cafe downtown. Drinking black coffee. Telling herself the birth had gone fine. That someone else had stepped in. That the child was alive. So what did it matter? She had patients today. New ones. Ones who did not complain. She could forget. She would move on. But the system had already begun moving without her. At noon, the chief of staff received a call. The caller identified himself only by last name. He requested a meeting. Said it was not about litigation. Said he would come by in person. When asked for clarification, he said one sentence. I just want to be sure this does not happen to someone else. And that was when the chief of staff understood. This was not about a lawsuit. This was about legacy. And legacy was far more permanent. Dr. Kepler returned to the hospital for her afternoon rounds. As she walked through the hallway, 2 nurses looked at her. One whispered. She felt it. Not hostility. Not gossip. Distance. She logged into the patient portal and found her access to one file restricted. The mother's. She blinked. Refreshed. Same message. Access denied. Record sealed under administrative review. That had never happened before. She called the floor administrator. Left a message. No reply. She told herself it was a glitch. She kept moving. That evening, a request was filed with the state medical board. Not a formal complaint. Just a cross-reference. A quiet inquiry to see if there had been any prior concerns. The query included her license number. That was all. But even that was enough to set off a chain. Because every time her name appeared now, it left a trail. And trails accumulate. The chief of obstetrics called her in 2 days later, asked her to walk through what had happened. She gave the usual lines. I did not feel comfortable operating without a full chart. I was not briefed properly. There was confusion about who was assigned. The chief nodded, took notes, then said, "The patient's partner is a state Supreme Court justice." She blinked. He said it again. "The partner is a sitting justice." He was outside the door. He heard everything. Still, she said nothing, just nodded. But inside, something cracked, because now she knew. The delay was not just a delay. It was going to become a question someone important wanted answered, and that meant her story was no longer hers to shape. She called her mentor that night, a senior physician, long retired, asked what to do. He asked, "Did you leave the room?" She said yes. He asked, "Was she in crisis?" She hesitated, then said yes. He was silent. Then he said, "Then it may already be too late." A week passed. Then 2. No letter. No call. Just small things. Her name removed from a patient brochure. A meeting rescheduled without her. An invitation to a panel that quietly disappeared. At first, she thought it was coincidence. But the air told her otherwise. People were backing away. No one said her name aloud. But no one stood beside her either. Then came the official notice. A hearing scheduled. Not public. Not televised. But formal. The charge, gross negligence with risk of fatality. The language was precise. Not murder, but reckless indifference to human life. Because the law had shifted. And someone with the power to ask for that shift had now decided to test it. She sat before the board in a small room. Fluorescent lights. No cameras. Just a table. And across from her, the mother, Camilla, alive, calm, holding her child. No lawyer, no folder, just presence. And beside her, her husband, not speaking, just watching, the same way he had watched her that day. Not to intimidate, but to witness. And witnessing in that room was enough. When they asked Camilla what happened, she only said this: "I was in pain. I asked for help." She looked at me like I did not belong in the room. That was all. She did not cry, did not raise her voice. And because of that, the weight of her words carried further. Because they were not designed to persuade. They were just true. 3 months later, Dr. Ellen Kepler lost her license. Not because of a lawsuit, not because of a verdict, but because too many people stopped defending her. And that kind of silence is hard to survive. She applied for jobs out of state. None called back. One recruiter said quietly, "Your name comes up flagged." She asked why. The recruiter said, "You know why," and hung up. A year later, a policy change went into effect. Hospitals in that network were now required to respond to obstetric crises within 15 minutes, regardless of provider-patient familiarity. It was called the Camilla Protocol. No one told her in advance. She read about it in a newsletter. She closed the tab, went back to feeding her child, said nothing, because this was never about being thanked. It was about not being forgotten. Her name was Marta Jennings. She had been a nurse for 11 years. Not flashy, not political, not one for staff drama. Just showed up on time, did her work, stayed late when needed, ate lunch alone, knew how to draw blood from a vein that kept rolling away, knew how to calm down a new father who thought his wife's groan meant something worse than it was. She had seen many doctors come and go, some who made her proud, some who made her cautious, and one who, in one afternoon, made her stop believing in neutrality. That one was Dr. Ellen Kepler, and Marta had seen everything. She had been the first to check Camilla's vitals, had paged the attending 3 times, had repeated the urgency out loud, not once, but twice. Dr. Kepler had walked in slowly, not rushed, not concerned, just annoyed. The way some people look at a table that has not been cleaned yet. Marta had said, as clearly as she could, "This patient needs to go in. Baby is in distress. She's fully dilated. Heart tones are dropping." Dr. Kepler had looked at the monitor, then looked at the mother, and said, "That is not my problem." Then she had walked out. At the time, Marta froze, because she had never heard those words spoken so plainly. She had seen hesitation. She had seen delay. But this was the first time someone said it out loud, with full intention, and left the room. Marta had gone straight to the phone, called again, called upstairs, called the second attending, and then waited, next to Camilla's bed, holding her hand, feeling her shake, whispering, "I'm here. Just breathe. I'm here." Even though she was not enough. Not without the one-person license to operate. Camilla never screamed. She moaned, low and deep, and Marta could feel in that sound a kind of betrayal no chart could record. When the second doctor finally arrived, Marta helped wheel the bed down the hallway. She ran beside them, hand on the side rail, then stood outside the operating room doors, and waited, fists clenched, breath held. It was not her child, but something in her heart was breaking like it was. When it was over, when both were alive, when the night shift came in, Marta clocked out and sat in her car for 20 minutes without moving. She thought about filing a formal report, then thought about what that meant. She was not new. She had seen how those reports could vanish, how they could turn into write-ups for her instead. Poor judgment, insubordination, creating conflict on the floor. But this time felt different, because this time, she knew someone else had heard it too. She had seen the man in the hallway, tall, still, holding his breath like a blade. She had seen him hear every word, and she had watched him not move. Not until Dr. Kepler was gone. That stillness had stayed with her, not threatening, but final. 3 days later, she was called into an administrative check-in. No formal tone, just a conversation, just a few questions. We heard there was some tension on the floor. We heard Dr. Kepler left early. We're trying to clarify what happened. She could have lied, could have said she was not in the room, could have said she did not hear clearly. But instead, she said the sentence that mattered. Dr. Kepler refused care. The man nodded, wrote something down, asked did she state a reason. Marta took a breath, said yes. She said she was not going to go elbow deep into someone like that. She said it in front of me, in front of the patient, in front of her husband. The man across from her looked up, closed his folder, and said thank you. That was all. But Marta felt it. The shift. She was not asked to testify. She was not called again. But 2 weeks later, Dr. Kepler's name was no longer listed as attending in any upcoming births. Then came the announcement that she was taking a leave of absence. Then came the whisper that she was under internal review. Then silence. Not the kind that protects, the kind that isolates. Marta kept working, kept showing up, but something inside her had changed. She no longer covered for anyone, no longer made excuses. If a doctor rolled their eyes, she said, "Would you like me to chart that expression?" If someone asked her to delay an update, she said, "I'll be putting the current time in the record." She was not angry. She was just done being quiet where harm grew. She had been invisible for so long that people forgot she was watching. But now they remembered, and not everyone liked it. Some doctors stopped making small talk. Some nurses rolled their eyes when she entered. But a few others, the quiet ones, the kind ones, nodded more often, stood next to her when no one else would, asked her quietly, was it true? She said yes, every word. A month later, she was given a commendation, not from the hospital, from the State Nursing Association, for professional integrity during crisis response. There was no photo, no speech, just a certificate in a plain envelope. She pinned it behind her ID badge, not to be proud, just to remember. One afternoon, Camilla returned to the hospital to pick up records, to ask about billing. Marta saw her from across the hallway, still slow in her walk, still holding her child, still carrying that quiet that made the air shift. They nodded at each other. No words, just two women who had shared a room where something almost broke and didn't, because one of them stayed. The next week, Marta got a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a note, 3 lines. Thank you for staying. Not everyone does. Some silence is survival. Some is surrender. She kept that note folded in her locker. Read on bad days. Not because she needed affirmation, but because it reminded her. Witnessing is not weakness. And telling the truth, quietly, without drama, was the most radical thing she had ever done. Dr. Kepler never contacted her, never apologized, never admitted anything. But that did not matter anymore, because Marta had already chosen which rooms she would never leave again, and which women she would never let stand alone, even if all she could do was hold their hand and say, "I see you." It was a Wednesday when she noticed a shift. Not a big thing, just a schedule change. Dr. Ellen Kepler arrived at the hospital a few minutes before her usual shift. She had done this for years. She liked routine, liked being early. It made her feel in control. She entered the staff portal, as she always did, to check her assigned patients for the day. The page loaded. Blank. No names. No room numbers. No rounds. She refreshed. Still blank. She checked her credentials. Still active. But her name was not on the board. Not anywhere. She called the charge nurse. "Hi, this is Dr. Kepler. I am not seeing my schedule. Is there a system issue?" A pause. Then a short reply. "You are not assigned to any patients today." She blinked. "Why not?" "You will need to check with administration." The line went dead. No warmth. No apology. Just dismissal. Like a phone call returned to default volume. She walked to her office, sat down at her desk, checked her email. There was no message explaining the reassignment, but there was a meeting request. Friday morning. Title: Compliance Clarification Follow-up. No details. No sender name. Just the system address. She stared at it, then clicked accept, and sat still. Thursday, she arrived again. No one said hello. No one asked for her signature. No residents followed her with clipboards. She walked through the hallway where her name used to hold gravity, and now the space around her felt untouched, like she was a visitor in a place that had already replaced her. At the elevator, a colleague walked past her. Dr. Sandoval. They used to share cases, used to have coffee once a week, used to laugh about the surgical interns who thought they were smarter than experience. Now, he looked at her and kept walking, not out of hate, out of calculation. He was not going to risk being seen with her. She entered the staff lounge. The fridge still had her container of soup from earlier in the week, still unopened, untouched. She reached for it, then stopped, closed the fridge, walked out. Friday came. The meeting room was colder than usual, air conditioning too high, or maybe it just felt that way. Inside were two people she knew by title, but not by name. Compliance officer, legal liaison. No white coats, no colleagues, just files, and silence. They did not accuse her. They asked questions. Did you assess the patient directly? No. Did you review her fetal monitor data? Only briefly. Did you document your decision to decline surgical intervention? No. I did not believe it was necessary at the time. Did you follow up on her outcome? No. Did you know her husband was a state Supreme Court justice? Pause. No. Not until later. They wrote everything down. No tone. No reaction. Just the sound of pen to paper. She asked, "Am I being suspended?" They said, "This is a fact-finding process." She asked, "Is my license at risk?" They said, "We are not in charge of licensure." She asked, "What happens next?" They said, "Someone else will be in touch." That was all. She left the room, walked out of the building. Her badge still worked at the door, but the beeping sound felt duller than before, like the scanner hesitated, like it asked the same question she now heard in every hallway. "Why are you still here?" That weekend, she attended a medical conference, one she had been invited to months ago. She had spoken at the last three, had been asked to chair a panel this year. She arrived early, checked in, received her badge, but her name was no longer listed on the speaker's roster. She went to the desk, asked for clarification. The assistant said, "One moment," then came back and said, "Your panel has been reassigned." She asked to whom. They said, "I am not sure," and smiled with that tight politeness used for people already on the way out. She sat in the back row during the session, tried to take notes, tried to look interested, but no one greeted her. No one asked her questions. One of her former students stood at the front and presented a case study on emergency obstetric ethics. The The slide said, "Timeliness of care determines survival outcome." She read it, did not blink, did not move, just listened, as if it had nothing to do with her. Back home, her inbox began to empty. No new consult requests, no journal invitations, no patient follow-ups. The silence did not scream. It whispered, "Not you. Not anymore." She called a colleague at another hospital, left a voicemail. "Hi, just wondering if you had any roles opening up. Looking for something fresh. Let me know." No reply. She tried another. This time, the line picked up. He said, "Sorry, I think it is best we do not talk about that right now." Then hung up. In the grocery store, a woman recognized her. Said, "I saw your face somewhere. You used to work at Mercy General, right?" She nodded. The woman said, "Thought so." Then turned and walked away. No accusation, no confrontation, just distance. She searched her own name that night. Google, news alerts, nothing major, just a few forum threads. Reddit, nursing groups. One post said, "That is the one who let that black woman almost die." Another said, "No one's confirming it, but everyone knows." A third said, "She still has her license?" She closed the laptop and sat in the dark. The next morning, she went to church, not out of faith, out of habit. She sat near the back. No one greeted her. After service, the usual coffee and cookies were served. She walked up to the table. The woman behind the counter smiled, then looked down, suddenly busy. She left without pouring a cup. In the parking lot, someone called her name. She turned. It was a former patient, a woman she had delivered twins for 5 years ago. The woman said, "I read about it. I did not want to believe it. You were so good to me." Then she paused, then said, "I do not know what happened, but I hope you do." Then walked away. That night, she stared at her framed medical degree, thought about taking it off the wall, then left it, turned out the light, and let the room go quiet. Camilla did not speak to the media. She did not hire a lawyer. She did not post anything. There were no hashtags, no statements, no interviews. After the hearing, after the ruling, after the last form was signed, she returned home and sat with her son in her lap and watched the ceiling turn gold from the late morning sun. No applause, no justice parade, no knock on the door to say, "Thank you for what you did." And she preferred it that way, because nothing had been done, not by her. She still had pain in her abdomen, nothing dangerous, just healing, the kind of tightness that reminded her what the body remembered, even when the mind wanted to move on. She slept lightly, woke every few hours, even when the baby did not. Her husband would find her sometimes sitting up in bed, not crying, not restless, just awake, thinking. He did not ask what about. He already knew. People had asked her gently, in quiet circles, how she felt about it all. She gave the same answer each time. "I do not feel anything." And that was mostly true, because what she had felt, fear, violation, disbelief, had passed through her already. What was left was not feeling. It was something flatter, like a field after fire, blackened, but still standing. 1 week after the board hearing, she received a letter. It came from the hospital, official, thin, printed on rough paper. It offered an apology, not from Dr. Kepler, from the institution. "We regret the distress you experienced. We are reviewing our emergency response procedures. We value your feedback. We welcome continued engagement." It was signed by an assistant director. No name she knew. No one who had been there that day. Inside the envelope was a second sheet. A short request. The hospital was forming a maternal outcomes advisory panel. Patients with lived experience were invited to participate, to consult, to advise, to lend their voice. Camilla read the paragraph 3 times, then folded the letter, set aside, and did not reply. A week passed, then 2. A reminder email came. "We would still love to include your perspective." Still no reply. Then another message, this time from someone with a title. "We believe your voice could help prevent future incidents." Camilla stared at the words. Voice, help, prevent. They all sounded good, but underneath them, she heard something else. Return. Soften. Be part of the solution that once failed you. She closed the message, deleted it. It was not out of bitterness. She knew the system needed fixing, but she also knew this. It was not her job to fix what tried to kill her. Not when the only reason they wanted her now was because of what she survived. Not who she was, just what she had lived through. She was not going to be their example. Not again. That was her small decision. Not loud, not defiant. Just the word no. Quietly, without punctuation. And in that absence, something moved. 2 weeks later, her husband received an email from a senior administrator. It asked whether Camilla might reconsider. He replied, "She has already answered." The email said nothing more, but the tone changed. Again, because now they understood that the silence was not oversight. It was choice. And choice, when made by someone who has nothing to gain, carries weight. The advisory panel proceeded without her. They brought in another mother. Young, articulate, kind. She smiled during the meetings, shared her story. The room nodded. They wrote down her words. Camilla read the minutes. She recognized the format, recognized the way suffering was turned into bullet points. 3 takeaways per experience. 1 policy suggestion. 2 follow-up questions. None of it changed anything, not in the way that mattered. The new procedures rolled out 3 months later. New signage, new language, new training videos, but the same hallways, the same silence when no one wanted to call for help. Camilla passed the hospital once in a taxi, looked out the window, saw the sign had been cleaned. The paint was brighter, but the windows were the same. She looked away, let the building pass behind her. One day, she received a visit. It was a social worker, friendly, soft-spoken, asking if she might be willing to join a focus group for improving racial equity in maternal care. Just a conversation, just an hour, just to share a few thoughts. Camilla poured her guest a glass of water, listened, nodded, and then said, "I think it is important work, but I will not be part of it." The woman looked surprised, then said, "Can I ask why?" Camilla replied, "Because every time I speak, someone else writes it down and takes credit for surviving it." The woman said nothing, just nodded, and left. Later that evening, her husband asked if she was sure. She said yes. He asked, "Do you feel at peace?" She said, "I feel quiet." Sometimes quiet is the only peace you are allowed. She still worked part-time, still processed housing forms, still called people to tell them a box was left unchecked. Her voice steady, her tone respectful, her kindness undiminished. But she no longer smiled when people were late. She no longer excused bad behavior in the name of stress. She no longer played along when something felt off. She simply said, "That is not acceptable," and left the sentence alone. No softening, no apology, no smile. In her neighborhood, she became known, not for what happened, but for how she stood in a room. The kind of presence that made others straighten. The kind of silence that made people notice their own noise. She did not ask for that, but she carried it anyway. Because once the system tries to erase you, even your breath becomes resistance. One afternoon, she sat in the park, her son sleeping on her chest. The sun low, the light soft. A woman approached, sat beside her, said, "I heard." Camilla looked up. The woman continued, "My cousin was in the hospital the week after you. Something was different. They treated her better. They looked at her. They listened." Camilla nodded, said nothing. The woman said, "They probably will not say it was because of you." Camilla said, "I do not need them to." The woman asked, "Will you tell your son?" Camilla looked down at him. Sleeping, small, alive. She said, "I do not know yet. Maybe one day when he asks why I do not volunteer anymore, or why I leave some invitations unanswered, or why I never step back into certain rooms, maybe then I will tell him that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is not return. The first mistake was small, a missing consent form. A postpartum mother did not sign the surgical release because no one had walked her through it in her preferred language. By the time the translation arrived, The attending had already begun prepping her for the procedure. It caused a delay, just 30 minutes. But the woman cried, said she felt tricked, said she felt invisible. The hospital apologized, privately, but the story lingered, because someone remembered that Camilla used to review those forms, used to remind them not to assume fluency, used to leave post-it notes on top of files with simple messages. This patient speaks softly. Listen carefully. She does not interrupt, but she will ask questions. Take your time. Now those notes were gone, and the gaps they had once covered were showing. The second mistake was harder to hide. A billing error. A duplicate charge sent to a patient who had already paid. The amount was small, but the patient was grieving. Her child had not survived delivery. The charge arrived 2 weeks after the funeral. No one caught it in time. No one flagged the system, because the person who used to double-check those entries had stopped answering their emails, had said without rage simply, "I am done contributing," and no one had followed up, because they thought she would come back. Eventually, she did not. The third mistake never made it into the reports, because it was not about paperwork. It was about people. A junior nurse called a patient the wrong name 3 times in one visit. The name was not hard, not unusual, just unfamiliar. No one corrected her. No one thought to step in. Camilla would have. Gently, without shame, she would have said, "That is not her name. Say it again. Listen this time." But she was not there. And now the patient, a mother of 2, new to the country, already nervous about the birth, filed a request to transfer hospitals. No explanation given, just left. And the space she left behind felt heavier than the one who had corrected the nurse would have. Inside the advisory board, the minutes were still typed, the action items still assigned, but the conversation had dulled. The woman who had replaced Camilla in the meeting smiled often. She was generous with her words, but she lacked something no one could name. Not intelligence, not compassion, but clarity. The kind of clarity born from having survived something and choosing not to let it twist you. They missed that, even if they did not say it. The board chair, a man who once called Camilla a critical thinker, now spoke with more caution. He had begun to realize what her absence revealed. Not that she had all the answers, but that she had asked better questions than most. Questions like, why is that the default? Who gets warned twice, and who gets removed the first time? Why are some delays written off and others recorded as emergencies? Without her voice, the room echoed. Same agenda, fewer revelations. A case study was presented at a quarterly review. It covered a near miss during a labor escalation. No major harm, but the mother reported feeling unseen. The review board read her feedback aloud. She wrote, "I said I was in pain. They told me I was anxious. I said I could not breathe. They said breathe slower. It was my 3rd birth. I knew something was wrong. No one believed me until it was almost too late." The room went still. Someone said, "We need to bring someone with more lived experience into these reviews." Another said, "Did we ever hear back from that woman? The one with the Supreme Court husband?" Silence. Someone cleared their throat, then changed the subject. Meanwhile, in the staff lounge, people whispered. Not loudly, not cruelly, just differently. They whispered about how things felt off, how morale was strange, how patients were more tense, how staff was less sure. They whispered about how even the quiet ones were watching, and how the ones who used to do a little extra, without being asked, had stopped staying late, stopped explaining twice, stopped covering gaps they did not cause, because they had seen what happened to the one who did everything right, and still almost died. A senior nurse said quietly, "We lost someone, not to death, but to distance, and I do not think we're getting her back." Someone else asked, "Do you think she is angry?" The nurse shook her head. "Worse, she is finished." At a regional conference, a presentation was scheduled on maternal equity practices. Camilla was not listed, but her case was anonymous. But everyone knew. The presenter used her data, used her survival, used her silence, and called it progress. No one in the audience questioned it, because they wanted the story to have already resolved, even when they knew it had not. A few floors above the labor ward, a junior administrator was hired. Bright, efficient, well-meaning. She read the files, saw the notes, asked her supervisor, "Why did this person never return? She seems like someone we would want." The supervisor replied, "She did return, just not to us." Back in Camilla's neighborhood, the mail carrier dropped a letter into her box. A third invitation to speak at a national event. Topic: When silence becomes strength. She tore the envelope in half, recycled it, then stood at the sink, hands in dishwater, and watched her son giggle at nothing in particular. She smiled, because here in this room, nothing was missing. At the hospital, a physician new to the team asked an older colleague, "What is the deal with the whole Camilla thing?" The older colleague said, "You mean what happened to the woman?" "Yes. Why does everyone get weird when her name comes up?" The older one replied, "Because she did not just survive. She refused to soften it for us. And now, the shape of her absence makes all our excuses feel too loud." It started with a grant, a quarterly funding renewal from a state-level maternal health initiative. The hospital had received it for 7 consecutive years. But this cycle, the response came back with a single line at the bottom of the email. "Application deferred pending additional review." No further explanation. The administrator reread the email 3 times. She sent a follow-up. 2 days passed. Then a reply. "Thank you for your inquiry. The review committee has questions regarding your emergency care protocols. A representative will be in touch." No timeline, no clarification. But everyone in the department understood what it meant. It meant someone was watching. And not just someone, the right someone. The second ripple came through a patient survey. Anonymous. Standard. But the story inside it was not. The patient described a situation in which she had expressed pain repeatedly and was told to wait. When the attending finally examined her, she had already begun to hemorrhage. The nurse had caught it. The doctor had not. In her comment, she wrote, "This was my second child. I know my body. You made me feel like I did not." She ended with a sentence no one could unsee. "I am alive, but not because of you." The third ripple came from the state's Board of Medical Ethics. They had opened a review panel on patterns of delay and denial in maternal care across 5 regional hospitals. Camilla's case, though technically resolved, had been cited in a footnote of a public health report as a notable example of protocol breakdown with racial bias implication. No names, but the hospital's initials were there, and so was the date. And so was the phrase that made the air go cold in every executive office. Severe lapse in professional judgment with near-fatal outcome. One department head resigned, said he wanted to spend more time with his family. Another quietly transitioned into a non-clinical role. Neither mentioned Camilla. They did not have to. The walls remembered for them. A local news outlet published a small piece. It was not investigative. Just a short column on rising concerns in maternal care. But the journalist had done her homework. The final paragraph read, "One patient, whose identity remains protected, described being left alone in active labor while a provider refused care. The delay nearly cost her life and the life of her child. Though no charges were filed, the doctor in question no longer holds a license in this state." The piece did not go viral, but people read it and remembered. Because even a quiet truth, once published, cannot be pulled back. Then came the departure of Dr. Sandoval. Not because he was accused, not because he failed, but because he had started asking the wrong questions. Why was this allowed? Who protected her? What did we learn? And the silence that answered him became louder than any answer. So he left. And the others who remained? They stopped asking too. A board member, sitting in on a staff evaluation meeting, noted the atmosphere had changed. Said, "Everything feels like it is bracing for something." No one disagreed, but no one named what that something was. Because to name it would be to admit how far the ripple had reached. Camilla, meanwhile, received a message. Not from the hospital, not from the board, from a former patient. A woman she had once helped during a home visit. The message read, "I do not know what happened to you, but I heard your name when a nurse corrected someone who dismissed me. They said, "Not after Camilla." That is all I needed to hear. Camilla read it twice, then deleted it. Not out of indifference, but because she did not need to keep it. She already knew what she had changed. Another ripple. A doula collective in the city added a clause to their referral guide. We do not refer clients to institutions where documented delays have resulted in harm. The hospital was no longer on the list. No announcement, just absence. The nurse Marta noticed a shift, too. More patients asking questions. More patients arriving with printed lists of what they would and would not accept. More eyes on every step. It should have made things better. But instead, it made every mistake more visible. Because now everyone was on edge. And no one wanted to admit they were still unprepared. At a staff meeting, someone mentioned Camilla's name. It slipped out. An intern asked, "Who is that?" No one answered. Not directly. But someone passed the intern a folder of orientation notes. Inside, someone had handwritten on the back page, "If a patient says she is in pain, believe her, especially if no one else does." That was all. In the administrative office, the legal team met with communications. They were drafting a potential public statement. Not about guilt, not about fault, just about reflection. But the wording was difficult. Because how do you say, "We ignored someone who almost died," without admitting the cost? How do you say, "We only listened after we were named," without naming the one we failed? The draft was never published. It sat in a folder labeled pending. It still sits there now. The ripple reached the donor network. One foundation that had contributed yearly to the maternal care center sent a notice. Due to recent concerns regarding patient treatment outcomes, we will be pausing financial support pending reevaluation. The email was short, but the impact long, because now it was not just about reputation. It was about resources, and systems only move when resources do. The ripple reached the university. A medical student stood up during a lecture and asked, "Are we going to talk about what happened last year?" The professor paused, asked, "What do you mean?" The student said, "The patient, the doctor, the silence." Another student added, "It is in our case files, but no one discusses it." A third said, "Then let us call it what it was. Neglect, racial neglect." The room went quiet, but the silence was different now. It was not avoidance. It was acknowledgement, and that changed everything. The final ripple came months later. At a national conference on obstetric safety, a panel titled "Learning from Our Failures." The final speaker, woman in a dark blazer, stood at the podium. She read a list of statements from unnamed patients, all of them survivors. One voice said, "I did not scream, but I was still unheard." Another said, "They kept asking me to wait, until waiting became dangerous." And a third said, "Someone chose not to touch me, and that decision almost ended me." Then the speaker paused, looked at the crowd, and said, "We build systems around protocols, but sometimes harm happens in the space between protocol and action, between what is required and what is humane. And when we see that space, we must close it, or the next ripple may be yours." Back at home, Camilla fed her son, wiped his face, cleaned the floor, folded the laundry. She did not know about the conference, did not read the article, did not follow the donation freeze. She was not tracking the echoes, because she did not need to. She had already left the water, and the ripple had never stopped moving. The lobby of the hospital looked the same. Polished floors, muted lighting, ferns near the elevator. The name of the facility still engraved in gold above the welcome desk. But something had changed. No one could quite say when or how, but the quiet had taken on a different shape. Less calm, more careful, as if everyone had begun walking softer, speaking slower, scanning faces twice before answering questions. No one said her name, not out loud, but she was there, in the pauses, in the revised protocols, in the way doctors now double-checked before walking out of a delivery room. Her name had become a shadow that cast longer than memory. Dr. Ellen Kepler no longer came through those doors. Her badge had been deactivated, her office cleared, her nameplate removed, the room reassigned. The hallway where her photo once hung now displayed a poster about maternal mortality reduction. It featured numbers, charts, smiles, but no names, especially not hers. She still lived in the city, in a smaller apartment now, farther from the center. She no longer practiced. Her license had not been reinstated. She had tried, filed the paperwork, sent the letters, paid the fees, but no one called. No one responded. No one opened the door. She kept her white coat in the back of her closet, folded once, never dry cleaned again. There was a coffee stain near the hem she had always meant to treat. Now she left it, let it brown, let it soften into something less than fabric, more than guilt. Some mornings she would take it out, hold it, not wear it, just hold, as if the weight of the cloth could remind her who she used to be, and how far she had fallen without anyone raising their voice. No one had shouted her name in protest. No one had filmed her. No one had chased her through parking lots. They had simply turned away, one by one, and she had kept standing until the floor gave way. Quietly, completely. In her building, the neighbors called her Miss, not Doctor. She corrected them once, then stopped. Now, when they asked what she did, she said, consulting. They never asked for more, and she was grateful, because even lies felt like mercy when no one asked you to prove them. On weekends, she went to the grocery store during off hours, shopped quickly, paid in cash when she could. There was always the fear that a card would be declined or a clerk would recognize her name. Most did not. The world moved fast. Even shame aged. But sometimes a glance would linger too long, or a smile would stop halfway, and she would know. They remembered. They just did not want to say so. She applied for a teaching position once. Adjunct, community college, medical ethics. The interview was short, the rejection shorter. She did not apply again. She began to volunteer quietly at a free clinic far from her old district. Not in medicine, just filing, organizing, wiping down chairs. They never asked for credentials. They never knew what she had been, only what she did now. And that, somehow, was the greatest relief of all. She had stopped dreaming in hospitals, stopped hearing the sound of fetal monitors in her sleep. But the memory of that room, the day she walked out, still found her in still moments, in the pause between sentences, in the ache behind her knees when she stood too long, in the words she never got to say to the woman who had once looked at her and said nothing back. Because Camilla never yelled, never accused, never even raised her chin. But the way she had looked at her, that look had followed her through every hallway since. Camilla, for her part, did not look back. She raised her son with quiet mornings and long walks. She taught him to say please before he asked for anything, and thank you only when he meant it. She did not tell him what had happened. Not yet. She wanted him to grow first without that story sitting in his spine. There would be time, she thought, later, when he could ask with more than curiosity, when he could carry the answer without thinking it belonged to him. She returned to work part-time, still quiet, still diligent, but something in her had hardened. Not cruel, just exact. She no longer asked twice, no longer smoothed her tone to be heard. If someone did not listen the first time, she simply moved on. If someone dismissed her, she let them, because now she understood how much energy she had spent making herself palatable, and how little it had saved her. She declined another invitation to speak. She did not open the envelope, just dropped it in the trash. She already knew what it would say. Come share your story. Come turn your pain into pedagogy. Come help us do better. But she was not responsible for their learning anymore. She had already done enough by surviving. One afternoon, she passed the hospital, her son asleep in the stroller, the sky gray, the air still. She did not slow down, did not look at the windows, did not wonder who was on shift. She simply kept walking, because that place had already taken what it would take, and she was not going to give it her gaze, too. Inside the hospital, a new nurse asked about the framed quote on the wall near the elevator. It read, "Silence is not always the absence of sound. Sometimes it is the beginning of change." The nurse asked, "Who wrote that?" No one answered. No one needed to, because in that building, the silence had a shape, and everyone had learned to walk around it. In the hallway outside the old operating room, a plaque had once marked the first successful maternal trauma surgery performed in the facility. It had been taken down, not removed, just relocated. They said it was being updated, but it never returned. And in its place, the wall remained bare, as if waiting for something more honest, or maybe simply deciding to let the space stay empty. Camilla still carried a small scar above her abdomen, faint, softened by time. She did not touch it often, but when she did, she remembered what the surgeon had said after the operation. "You were lucky." She had nodded, but what she wanted to say was, "No, I was supposed to be protected." That was not luck. That was delay. That was almost. That was nearly not being here at all. But she said nothing then, and she said nothing now, because her story was not for them. It was hers, not to inspire, not to warn, just to keep, and carry, and live beyond. In the end, the hospital went on. Births continued. Forms were filled. The waiting room filled and emptied and filled again. But something had shifted. Not visibly, not loudly, but undeniably. Everyone moved slower now. Everyone looked twice. Everyone remembered what happened to the woman who never raised her voice, and what it cost them not to listen the first time. Camilla sat by her window one evening, watched the sun set without rush, her son asleep in the other room, her husband reading quietly nearby. No music, no news, no need to speak. The world had already said too much. Now it was her turn to keep still, and to let stillness speak for her.